Nina, today we're going to look at a technique that works for any type of project. We are going to do piping.
I love piping.
It is really a nice finished detail, I think.
Well, it always makes everything look so much more finished.
It does. And you can use it in clothing and quilting, home deck, just about anything to define the seams or the edges that you're working with.
So whether it's on the outside of a pillow or binding like this, or even on this garment.
And it's a great place
really
to
looks
add
nice.
just a touch of color. Okay, as always, we're going to do this technique with a particular foot. And this is foot number 12, and it has an unusual name because it's called bulky overlock foot. And the reason is it was originally designed to sew heavy sweater knits together. And the tunnel that's on the bottom is where the heavy sweater knit would go, the seam would go as you were sewing it. What we are going to do is put cable cording down that tunnel so that we can make piping. Okay, Nina, I have already covered my cord with fabric. And just like with other piping techniques, if you are going to be going around a curve, you need bias cut strips. If you're only doing straight edges, then straight cut would be fine. I will put this under the foot and make sure that the cord goes into that groove. Now, when I covered the cord, I had my needle position over a couple of steps from that engraved line. So now I'm going to make sure that it lines up with the engraved line so that now it will stitch along the cord and my previous stitching won't show.
Okay.
Now I'm actually combining a couple of steps because this foot helps me. I am inserting this piping into a seam by putting the two pieces together with the piping in the middle.
Look at how
Nice and tight.
Mm-hmm.
So the trick to this is that what I just did works on straight edges, but when you're working on quilts and garments and pillows, you're usually turning corners and going around curves. So you need to know a little bit about how to do that. So let's put this aside. And I have a piece. In this case, you're going to insert it into a seam, but you'll do it in 2 steps.
So that's probably how this was done.
Yes.
With the curve on the vest.
Yes. Okay, I have the piping under the foot, and I have the needle position all the way to the right. Because what I'm doing now is just attaching the piping to the project, and I will come back with the other piece on top of it. Now we're coming up to a corner. This is really an easy way to make that a nice turn. You stop before you get to the corner, about a seam allowance away, and then you take your scissors and you're going to clip right at the needle, right where the needle is, you clip the seam allowance up to the cording. Now when you pivot, you can turn that piping and you just continue stitching. You're going to continue stitching right along beside it. We get to the next corner, we're going to do the same thing. Just clip that seam allowance so that it has enough give that you can turn the corner. And then we're going to do a curved edge. And the curved edge is a similar technique, but what you want to do is just clip the seam allowance in several places, and as you move around the curve, you'll be able to shape it to the curve. So we have our little shaped sample with the corners and the curve, and I'm going to show you now the step that we do to insert it in the seams. You put your second piece of fabric, so if this were a pillow, you'd have your front and back, and then you turn it over, and we're going to use our first stitching as a guide, because what we want to do is put it under the foot with the cord in that tunnel and align that row of stitching with the groove that's on the foot. Then you want to go to your needle position and move it in to the left 1 notch so that it's right next to the row of stitching, and what that does is it keeps your previous stitching from showing. And then we're going to pivot, and this is what gives the nice tight appearance to the cording or the piping after you turn your project.
So I will never see any stitching on my piping.
Correct.
Because,
If you follow these little tips, then you will not. So once you turn the project, you can see how nice and tight the piping is.
Well, it's nice and tight and perfect, and I don't see any stitching like I do when I use purchased piping.
Correct, because you have that guide on the foot and you change your needle positions to avoid that. To get more information on making piping and using other Bernina presser feet, visit your local Bernina dealer today.